Thank you very much. I don't know about this microphone, everything. You can hear me all? Okay, very good. All right, well, as I am Texas State Director of American Atheists, you might imagine I have some problems with religion in general, beginning with the fact that it is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true. Yet that's what all religions do. And they're not above using deception to defend their faith either. And this is particularly true in the case of, there we go, creationism. Creationism is a form of religious extremism. It replaces scientific methodology with the belief in magic, which is the evocation of supernatural powers or entities to control or forecast natural events. Under this influence, science can no longer function, because if it can't be tested to be confirmed or corrected, then it does not qualify as knowledge. Now, creationism superimposes a legendary history over the real one and commands that you believe that and whatever else they tell you because they said so. You're supposed to swallow it all on faith. But when is it ever wise to believe what you're told without question, without reservation, and certainly not without reason? Now, you're not going to be a useful minion if you don't cower to authority and do as they tell you. That's why religious fundamentalism hates public education. They want to strictly control information because people are smart and they'll figure out the truth if they're able. The mass murdering cult leader, Charles Manson, put his own spin on the old Nazi quote that if you repeat a lie enough times, especially a big lie, that people will believe it and you'll eventually even believe it yourself. I've actually heard Christians promote this idea with the slogan, "Fake it till you make it." But Manson put an important addendum on when he said that they may not believe it completely, but they'll still have to refer to it if they don't know anything else. And that is a sufficient summary of the agenda of creationism with regard to how they teach children in school. Religion is a means of manipulation of the masses, and they do this by the indoctrination of faith, especially targeting young children before they reach the age of reason. Because, and this is what happened to me, if you wait until they're 8 or more years old and already have an idea of the realities revealed by science, and then you tell them about Noah's Ark and sticks turning into snakes and the sun stopping in the sky, and especially Adam and Eve, and all of this requires that they reject everything they already know to be true, you're going to have a hard time brainwashing that child. But if you get them before that age, you can seize their logical development. Get them to accept whatever you tell them, and they may never develop the ability to question that. And it isn't enough that they deceive only their own children. If yours are the only kids on the block who still believe in the tower to heaven and talking snakes and donkeys and guys living inside fish, then through pure peer pressure, they won't believe that very long. And if you're the only one who still believes it, but then you're the weirdo. Whether delusion is defined as insanity or religion depends on how many people share it. The more common it is, the less crazy it seems, and the more power it wields. So they've got to infect everyone else's kids too, not just their own. And our children are protected from this sort of thing by the Constitution, right? Not quite. The purpose of this map is to show that there are thousands of schools using public funds to teach biblical creationism as if it could be really true. As you can see, this is happening right now in Louisiana, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, Utah, Washington, Wisconsin, Tennessee, and Texas. But this map does not adequately convey the severity of the situation. There are dozens more schools just in Texas that are using a loophole in religious studies to teach the Bible as an account of history. These legends, or these Freudian slip, these lessons include criticism of other religions, anti-Semitism, and of course denigration of science, along with instilling all of the conservative right-wing political ideologies, which is what this is really all about. And that is to say nothing of all the insidious good news clubs that have sprouted up all over the country. These groups use full-tilt evangelizing to proselytize young children regardless of parental consent. If you're not familiar with the Good News Clubs, look them up. Catherine Stewart wrote a detailed expose on them, and it ain't good news, I can tell you that. Now, obviously I object to teaching creationism because it's promoting a particular religious view, which I don't happen to share, with good reason. But my objection to that is not based on my opinion with regard to theology. Of course, that requires that I also object to it on secular grounds, because for a government-funded school to endorse and impose and promote a particular religious mythology is a violation of the First Amendment with regard to separation of church and state. But that's not my primary concern either. If it was, I would happily advocate the idea that parents can trot their kids off to some fundamentalist private Christian school if that's the sort of mind-numbing nonsense they want instilled in their impressionable little heads. I do not advocate anyone's attempt to mislead and deceive students seeking an education. And teaching creationism demands a degree of deliberate deception. It's not just that none of the stories in the Bible are in any way supported by science. It's much worse than that. All the evidence available anywhere contradicts that compilation of fables. Through several different independent yet concordant fields of study, we now know for certain that the Tower of Babel and the worldwide flood never happened. These are both grotesque exaggerations of much more modest events, which occurred centuries before the religion of Judaism was ever conceived by man. Even rabbinical scholars now admit that the way the Bible describes the Exodus is not the way it happened, if it happened at all, and the Garden of Eden is at best an allegorical adaptation of earlier mythos, which were previously polytheist, having profoundly different meanings, but with all the identifying elements already obvious. So it's not as if I don't want children to learn all competing theories. In this case, there are none. Oh, skipped one. Yep, it skipped one. Okay. Intelligent design is a theory in name only. Evolution is the only theory of biodiversity there is or ever was, and it's one of the best supported theories in all of science. It has multiple mechanisms, testable, potentially falsifiable hypotheses, and has identified at least a few natural laws specific to that field. If we were to use the word proof, in the sense that a court of law would use, then there are many ways to prove evolution, and that has been done. Creationism meets exactly none of the criteria required of a scientific theory, because it's not about knowledge. It is the power of pretend. It is literally make-believe, and there is no truth in it. That's a direct challenge, by the way. If anybody wants to call me out on that, you just have to show me one tenet of creationism that is verifiably true. The truth is what the facts are. There are many facts that I can show to be true of evolution. Take a gander at some of these, if you will. But there are no facts pertaining to, concordant with, or supportive of creationism. There's no mechanism to creationism, no indicative evidence whatsoever, and not one natural law applicable to it, or that is not broken by it. It can't be indicated or vindicated, verified or falsified by any means creationists would accept, and yet it has been utterly disproved in every testable claim that it makes. I object to teaching creationism because it's wrong, and I mean on every level, because it's not just wrong scientifically and historically. It's also wrong ethically and morally. It's not just a little wrong, it's completely wrong. Consequently, it is not possible to defend creationism honestly. So, defenders of the faith have devised the practice of apologetics to make excuses, to rationalize away or conceal all the many absurdities, atrocities, inconsistencies, and contradictions. One of the common ploys here is the game of equivocation and projection. The game is played with a creationist pretending to be objective, but projecting all his own faults onto the science-minded, who, of course, will not share any of those flaws. And it goes something like this. Well, If you got science, we got science too. No, you don't. Well, if my view is religious, yours is religious too. No, it isn't. Very often that game, whoops, that's the slide that was supposed to be on there before, out of order. Very often that game requires a creationist to tell one or more of the following lies. And one creationist website says that evolution and creation are equally scientific and equally non-scientific, both at the same time. They can't tell which fib they want to follow. This is not just childish behavior. These are not forgivable mistakes, and these are not mere matters of opinion. These are lies. And remember that a lie is misinformation or information misrepresented with deliberate intent to deceive. And that's what's going on here. Creationism has no evidence. Evolution does. So we don't need faith. One lie I've seen repeated a few times lately is the allegation that, well, evolution is just a fairy tale for grown-ups. Remember when I said they like to project their own faults onto others? If you look up the definition of a fairy tale, you'll see that it is a folklorish story, usually with a moral, but one which includes dragons, witches, giants, magic spells, and or animals who speak and act like human beings. That doesn't match the study of evolution at all, but it does exactly describe the Bible perfectly. Even if the Bible were true, it would still be a fairy tale. Although my wife says that the involvement of deities properly defines the Bible as myth, and some portions of it may even qualify as legend, but that's about the best you can say of it. Equivocation, projection, logical fallacies, and lies. That is all creationism has. And that is how they defend their belief against all the mounting evidence. I've been debating this topic almost constantly for decades now, and sometimes believers will end the discussion with an admission that my argument makes sense, but that they're going to continue to believe anyway. No matter what, they're going to believe what they want to believe, what they have to believe. And sometimes the believers will say, well, these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. And in each case, there is no concern about whether we can show that any of this is even true, and that should be the only criteria. Very often, it seems that they know it's not true. Have you ever seen a biologically mature adult literally stick their fingers in their ears and shake their heads and close their eyes and shout so that they can blot out what they don't want to hear? I have seen that, but only when discussing this topic. When cornered on a point they know they can't defend and forced to concede what you both already know is false, but which they are forbidden to admit, don't let them off the hook, don't let them change the subject. If there's no way to rationalize or justify, if there's no excuse and no escape, then rather than the honest admission you'd expect, you're more likely to see an emotional meltdown or a psychotic episode. The subject will become distraught, they will lose all maturity, and immediately launch a playground-level temper tantrum because they can't admit any critical error, even to themselves. Now, you might think that forcing someone to this breaking point would be the turning point, that they would break the addiction, see the error of their ways, and become more reasonable later on. I've yet to see that happen. More often, believers have confessed to me that they will continue to believe even when they have certain proof that what they believe is not true. There was a documentary called Questioning Darwin, came out last year, and it interviewed exclusively believers and was meant to promote creationism. but all non-believers and believers who consider themselves reasonable or moderate should see this film, because it is a philosophical and psychological freak show. One of the people interviewed in this show said that any scientific fact which contradicts the Bible must be false, because the Bible can't be wrong. And besides, what do educated expert specialists really know compared to ignorant, primitive, superstitious savages? And it doesn't matter that a fact, by definition, can be proven to be true. Because another guy interviewed on the same show said that if the Bible said that if the Bible said that 2 plus 2 equals 5, that he wouldn't question that he would find some way to believe it. And of course, he's not the only one like that. William Jennings Bryan, prosecuting attorney for the Scopes monkey trial and a presidential candidate once upon a time, once said that if the Bible said that Jonah swallowed the whale, that he would believe it. So it doesn't matter that you can prove that this is false. And it doesn't matter how obviously or how eloquently you do that. Once these people have been thoroughly indoctrinated, their logical sensors selectively shut down. And it may not be possible to ever reason with them again where this subject is concerned. Now, the definition of delusion is a persistent false belief that is maintained despite indisputable evidence to the contrary, to falsely claim something when there is evidence otherwise. And I know a theist who describes his own position thus: I have evidence that A exists, but I choose to believe B. Although everything points to A, I'm going with B. And according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, what makes these beliefs delusional is that they don't change when the person is giving conflicting information. The beliefs remain fixed even when the facts contradict them. And this debilitating mindset is much more common than you might imagine. Every creationist organization there is posts a statement of faith as if this were something to be proud of, wherein they admit that they assume their conclusions at the onset for reasons that have nothing to do with factual information, and more importantly, where they refuse to ever admit when they're wrong. Each of these organizations announces that they will automatically and thoughtlessly reject without consideration any and all evidence that might ever arise should it conflict with their interpretation of Bronze Age folklore. And mind you, no scientific organization would participate in anything so Orwellian, so biased, and so dishonest as this. And if truth mattered more than whatever you prefer to believe, this wouldn't be necessary, and it wouldn't be included. But among creationists, truth is irrelevant. These are excerpts from some of the leading creationist organizations in 2005. Here's the one for Answers in Genesis Now. It says it is imperative that people believe that the Bible is the absolute infallible truth and the supreme authority on all matters. That's the assertion of unreasonable conviction. If you scroll to the bottom of this page, the last bullet point still says, by definition, no apparent or perceived or claimed evidence in any field, including history and chronology, can be valid if it contradicts the scriptural record. And there is the admission that they have already rejected all the evidence there could ever be, no matter what we may discover in the future or how conclusive that is. In other words, no matter how true the truth really is, no amount of proof will ever change their minds. But hey, if you're prepared to believe that 2 plus 2 equals 5, then you're prepared to believe anything but the truth. Answers in Genesis mixes apologetics with pseudoscience. They've hired a bunch of apologists with legitimate scientific degrees so that they can create the illusion of equal credibility and so they can appear to argue from authority. It says on this page that they have a list to show that there are qualified scientists doing important research. who still believe in the myths of the Bible. It's important to point out, though, that none of these people are doing important research in the field of creationism itself. That's not possible because there is no scientific data to support or imply that any of this obviously mythological nonsense is even true, and there is quite a hell of a lot to prove that it's not true. Now let's look at the sort of people they employ. These are geologists Andrew Snelling and Paul Garner discussing the fossil Acanthostega gunnari, which in my opinion is the ultimate transitional species. It is essentially the Darwin fish. But you can't have transitional species when you believe in created kinds, right? So Andrew Snelling says that Acanthostega can't be transitional because its limbs are securely connected to the vertebrae to support the animal's weight so that it is clearly designed for walking. Paul Garner says that Acanthostega can't be a transitional species because its legs can't support its body weight out of water, so it is clearly designed for swimming. And the best way to argue the best way to know whether a transitional qualifies as such or not is when creationists can't agree and each say that it is 100% on either side of whichever line they want to devise. Now, let's look at what you have to do if you want to join the oxymoronic cult of creation scientists. You have to submit a signed copy of their statement of faith with your endorsement, promising to promote that. And you must follow that with your own testimony to promote Christianity regardless what the facts are. In addition, you also have to provide references from Bible-believing Christians, including at least one pastor. What you know about science doesn't matter. That's why many of the famous creationists with PhDs are dentists. All that matters is that you believe in the mystical mumbo-jumbo, and you promise to promote that even when it has been proven to be certainly false. Now, what if you didn't have this desperate need to believe that is so overwhelming that it causes you to lie in defense of your truth? What if you had instead only a desire to understand and to find out what the truth really is, regardless what the truth might turn out to be? The purpose of science is to improve understanding. Creationism can't do that, because the only way to do that is to seek out the flaws in your current perspective and correct them. Now, if that is already your mindset, then you will assume less and inquire more. You'll be honest in your inquiry, and you won't likely believe anything on faith. Now, what if that would have always been your natural tendency, but you've been inculcated in some other philosophy since childhood? In the world of creationists, there are only the deceivers and the deceived. And in that latter set are many innocents who are naturally curious, but they've been raised like mushrooms, in that they've been kept in the dark and fed only bullshit. It's not always impossible to reason with such people, and it's worth the effort, because some of our best advocates of science and rationalism and our most outspoken anti-theists were former believers. Because once they realize how they've been methodically lied to all their lives, they are justifiably outraged. And both of the men speaking with me here today were once fervent believers. They were not beaten or bullied out of their perception. They were challenged, shown how to test their beliefs, to discover, to know how to know, and to show the truth of what they now know, not just within the mirrored confines of their own minds, but to anyone else who might ask. If they're honest enough that what is really true is what really matters, then their minds can be awakened and change. But why go through all the hair-pulling frustration of trying to cure 1 out of 100 hampered minds? Why not prevent whole classrooms from being infected in the first place? We cannot allow lessons in mythology to spill into and spoil the other classes around it, science, sex, social studies, and so on. I know that we infidels like to consider ourselves the most tolerant demographic, but we can't tolerate religious infiltration into children's education because it is wrong. It's as wrong as it can be, and it's wrong every way that it can be. Wherever it is detected, we must object and effectively obstruct it. No more lying to students, closing their minds with factless fairy tales. Let's get real.